All right, and so chapter 2, a geographic cure. So Alex is John's oldest brother. Alex Wilson's heart was not in the grocery trade, and in a very few years, his neglect and indifference ran his parents' once thriving business into the ground. Pure laziness and nothing else. Jim Hutchinson told his sister Polly, that was a good, solid business. Remember, he inherited his parents' now deceased business. In his sudden frantic attempts to salvage the business, Alex talked to his sister Mary out of £200, and he raised a further £300 by granting a bond on the property, so £500 in total. Then he forged the signature of an old friend of his father's who had left his bank book in George Wilson's honest hands for deposits. When George died, Mrs. Wilson took over that duty, and Alex agreed to do it when his mother died. Alex stole £500. So in total, he has £1,000, 500 borrowed, 500 stolen. Jack, who couldn't bear to see the once respected business end in disgrace, took money out of the greenhouse business to pay off his brother's debts. When things continued to slide, he panicked and stole money outright from his brother-in-law, Jim Hutchinson, to pay creditors. So this is Jack doing this. He's stealing money from his brothers-in-law business to pay off his brother's loans. All to no avail. When the bank foreclosed in October 1911, the Wilson family brought Alex £28. The Wilson family business brought him £28. When people learned of the measures the brothers had taken, they were scandalized. Alex stealing from a trusted old man was seen as despicable, as was Jack's taking money from his wife's family. The Wilsons' good reputation lay in ruins, and Jack felt humiliated and disgraced. He never forgave Alex. So both of their integrities now are gone. Polly's family protected her from the worst of the scandal. Over cups of tea in his cluttered greenhouse office, Jim Hutchinson vented his feelings to his sister Elizabeth. Elizabeth taught school in the district, and her fiance, Archie Craig, had bought a partnership in the greenhouses. He was living with Jack and Polly till his marriage in 1912. Liars. Jack and Alex both, Jim said. They must have been feeling desperate. Elizabeth, like Polly, always tried to see the best in people. So Polly tries to see the best in people. And we already know that Jack lies. It was mentioned that right in chapter 1. Jim snorted. Do you realize Jack's bankrupted the gardens? That makes me a desperate man. Should I go out then and steal from some helpless old man? I know, but Jack is our brother-in-law. More's the pity. Everyone knows Alex is as crooked as a dog's hind leg, but I never thought of it of Jack. Jim leaned over to pick some blossoms from a potted plant on his desk. Do you know he's thinking of running away to Canada? I'd say good riddance if it wasn't for the Baron and the one on the way. Archie told me that, but surely Jack won't go and leave Polly, not in her condition. So Polly's pregnant again. They have Georgie, their first kid, now she's pregnant again. No, I suppose not. But Jack Wilson had indeed developed an urge to travel, swayed by the propaganda luring immigrants to the Canadian prairies. He bought a ticket to Saskatoon in the province of Saskatchewan. He would sail in July of 1912. Now, propaganda, what's that? Well, yeah, propaganda. What is that? Kind of, yeah. It's like, how are our winters here? Really cold, right? Our summers can get a little hot as well. Lots of mosquitoes and stuff. Hey, come over to Saskatchewan. We'll give you a bunch of free farmland. It's glorious here. We're not going to mention the cold. We're not going to mention all the hard work and stuff like that. So propaganda is basically like they're kind of selling a lie to try and like trap people in there. So that's what they're doing. He could have stayed and faced it. His sister Mary told Polly. The rest of us did. Of course, Jack could have told Mary it's easier to face the music if you aren't the one who wrote it. Polly was 6 months pregnant when he left. So 6 months pregnant with child number 2. It's only for a year, he told her, kissing her again and again. Alex will straighten things out and I'll be back. Daddy, please don't go. Little George, who followed him everywhere, clung to his leg. Please, Daddy. Archie Craig, wanting to take Jack to the train for Liverpool, stepped outside to give them the privacy. Through the window, he heard the little boy crying as if his heart would break. Archie heartily wished Jack would hurry up. They were in danger of missing the train, and he just made it harder for everyone this way. Finally, Jack emerged and climbed in the trap. I'll be back in a year, he called. I'll write lots of letters. At the station, Jack gripped Archie's hand. Promise me, Archie, that you will look after Polly and be good to her for my sake. So he's worried about his wife. I want you to take care of my wife while I'm gone. I'll be back in a year. I'll write lots of letters. You have my word, Jack. My wee lassie is all the world to me. So he's from Scotland, right? We're seeing some of that accent come in. His wee lassie is his wife, his girl. Jack said with tears in his eyes, there was a lot of actor in Jack Wilson. Like many Scots, he went through life treading God's boards. So there was a lot of actor in Jack Wilson. So ashamed and aggrieved, Jack Wilson left his quiet village in the pastoral Clyde Valley. In Liverpool, he boarded a steamer headed for Canada. Standing on the crowded deck as the steamer pulled away from the overflowing dock, he heard a wistful sound drifting over the water. Should odd acquaintance be forgot and never brought to mind, saying those left behind in the tradition of time, waving hundreds of damp handkerchiefs in the summer air. This plaintive acknowledgement that odd acquaintance can indeed be forgotten was followed by much cheering as the ship gathered speed. Wilson shared a cabin 7 feet square with upper and lower bunks on 3 sides and the door on the 4th, all below the waterline. So 7 square feet is like basically as tall as I am in a room, like as tall as I am, and then I just like turn the other way. So it's really small, right? In the words of one 1913 passenger, the grub was dished up in wash tubs and you helped yourself. It took 12 days to make the crossing, and I want to tell you the North Atlantic is no place to be in April. Since there was no privacy with 2,000 people jammed together, Wilson spent most of his time on the deck where the air was fresh. It would have been hard for passengers not to think of the fate of the unsinkable liner, Titanic, which had sunk a few days out of Southampton on her maiden journey just 2 months before, but Wilson's crossing was uneventful. In Halifax, Nova Scotia, Wilson transferred to a westbound train crowded with immigrants from all over Great Britain and Europe. Some were leaving from Eastern Canada too, where unemployment figures were rising. Yeah, we looked at that. Most came hoping for a better life, the chance to own some land. Some, like Wilson, were fleeing scandals at home, and many would never look back. If a man was too well dressed, he was suspected of being a remittance man, one of the alcoholics and ne'er-do-wells, paid by well-to-do families to stay away. Observing the Poles, Germans, and Ukrainians sharing his journey, Wilson would have been shocked, but as a Scot, secretly pleased to learn that English laborers were among the least favored immigrants. Employers complained that they often brought trade union ideas with them. Soon after Wilson's arrival, the years of prosperity ended, and the long lines of men applying for work were greeted with signs flatly stating, "English need not apply." The train compartments were large compared to those on British trains. In pull-down overhead bunks bare of mattresses, women prepared for bed behind pinned-up blankets and newspapers. At the end of each coach was a small compartment with a stove for heating food and men's and women's bathrooms. The smell of ethnic foods mingled and drifted out into the coaches as faces from many countries peered through the grimy windows at the immensity and variety of this new land. Day after night after day, they rocked along through thick spruce forests with glimpses of rocky coastlines, past apple orchards, the stares of grazing cows, great Russian unpolluted rivers, virgin hardwood forests, clear lakes, verdant valleys, and the marvelous St. Lawrence River. So one thing I will say with this story, this is very much not a landscape story. Like, this is not like The Painted Door where we're looking at the landscape and stuff. When you talk about this and write about this, you will be talking about the characters. Gentle roll in Ontario gradually leveled out as the train rocked westward and the prairies unfolded. So much land, so much sky, so few people. The ships were packed, the trains crowded, and settlers' belongings piled high on every station platform. The next year, 1913, the number of immigrants would reach an all-time record of 400,870. That is about as many as we bring today. Wilson wrote letters after letter to Polly as he traveled west. His long, newsy, often passionate letters described what he saw and assured her they'd be separated no more than a year. It was Alex's fault for making him an exile. Polly kept every letter. So does he seem like a man who's in love with his wife? Yeah, he's writing lots of passionate, long letters all the time to his wife. He lingered on his final goodbye to the point where they almost missed the train away. So chapter 3, the 8-year-old wonder of the British Empire. And why did John Wilson choose Saskatoon as his destination? He was one of the many enchanted by the rhetoric that shamelessly billed the faraway prairie city as the fastest growing city in the world, which it was at one point. Regina was growing rapidly as well. The Minneapolis and St. Paul of the West, and the 8-year-old wonder of the British Empire. At Canadian immigration offices in London, Edinburgh, and everywhere in the United Kingdom, crowds pressed around the windows to see working models of Saskatchewan grain elevators and to read about the wonders of the Canadian prairies. Large signs announced 160-acre farms in Western Canada, free improved farms at reasonable prices, healthy climate. We have anything but a healthy climate here. No mention of the 50-degree below zero winters, and so on. The Canadian Immigration Office in London faced Trafalgar Square, and the 1904 Department of Interior report stated that the bright and attractive nature of the immigration office buildings will be emblematic to many of the bright future which Canada has to offer. The people of Great Britain were being courted and capitulated by the thousands. There was at least some substance behind the rhetoric. Saskatoon was indeed a burgeoning city, ringing with the sounds of hammers and saws and shouts and laughters of men, and imbued with the smells of sawdust, horse manure, and money. Horses and a few cars crowded the city streets, and the bustle of commerce was everywhere. So it was a really bustling city. There was lots of people coming in. It was really growing. There was a lot of trade that's happening in Saskatoon in the early years. New cement sidewalks appeared overnight. Dirt flew from scores of shovels as miles of trenches were dug and sewer pipe laid. The track for the new street railway gleamed with horse droppings. Saskatoon had 9 architectural firms, 12 automobile dealers, 16 livery stables, 13 banks, 14 pool rooms, bars, 5 employment offices, 9 theaters, and 2 massage parlors. The handsome stone building of the university were rising on the high south bank of the river. The city sprawled on both sides of the pristine South Saskatchewan River, hence the Minneapolis-St. Paul comparison. Already spanned by a traffic bridge on Victoria Avenue and a railroad bridge further east, Saskatoon looked just like a city. All it needed were more people. A fierce rivalry for citizens had sprung up between Saskatoon and Regina, the capital city. The city's fathers wore ever more alluring propaganda to attract settlers, and on census days they counted every live body they found, including transients and those passed out by the railway tracks. And prairie boosterism was perceived to be the duty of all good citizens. Some lonely prairie homemakers living in sod shacks must have laughed behind their aprons or cried. It is highly unlikely that Wilson's train arrived on time. Trains in Saskatoon rarely arrived on schedule, so rarely that a train that did earn this account in a 1903 Star Phoenix, which later became, the Star Phoenix. The southbound train from Prince Albert was on time on Tuesday morning, December 30th, to the amazement and consternation of the citizens. Letters were unwritten, passengers were still in bed. Visitors called their host to the door to see the unique spectacle, and mothers impressed it upon their children as a never-to-be-forgotten occurrence. Newly married couples who set their dates in the hope of a train behind time were politely left behind, and lovers who came away from home expecting to return by a behind-time train had to look for lodging. What a little thing it takes to set all the machinery of society in confusion. When will it happen again? To the Phoenix, 1 year free to the first person who guesses the correct date, up to April 1st, 1903. So he's arrived in Saskatoon, basically. That's a really long-winded way of saying that. So cool, John Wilson's in Saskatoon. It's a hustling, bustling city. They're growing. So what does he do? He looks for work almost immediately. Wilson was hired onto a bridge and building crew, one of the many working long hours to keep up with the demand. It is a massive, growing city. There are lots of jobs. He starts working as a building crew. He first worked on the University Bridge. We've probably all driven over that, which would not be completed until 1916. At lunchtime, with the clamor of hammers on iron silent, the men watched fish jumping in the clear river that curved in both directions. As they sat and smoked with legs dangling over the side, they had a perfect view of the changing autumn colors and the burgeoning city on both sides of the river. Good housing had become scarce and expensive, but Wilson managed to find lodging in a rooming house. He did not mix much, and every Sunday he faithfully wrote to Polly long, newsy, often ardent letters, which Polly read over and over. So every week he is sending her a long, long letter. During his period, he also dutifully sent home quite a lot of money. So we see this a lot in Canada, right? You have an immigrant come over, they leave a family behind, and they're coming over here for work, and they're sending as much money as they can back home. We see this all the time, even today.
This is based on a real story.
This is a real story. Yeah, yeah. This guy existed. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So because we wanted as many people as possible, right? Because we don't want the US to come up here. We have all this land. We want it to be working. We want the economy to be booming. Literally, like we put up an advertisement in like everywhere in like London. We're like, do you want to come here? Come here. We'll give you free land. That's it. No visa, no nothing. It's just you still have to go through an immigration officer. What are you here for? I'm from Scotland. I'm here to work. Approved. So chapter 4. So you're going to see like these V's and these X's, and these lines. That means 1, a V means 5, and an X means 10. This is chapter 4, basically. Oh, poor Jack. Uh-oh. So at the butcher's, Polly bought lamb for stew and then stopped at Gossard's Draper's for white silk thread and seam blinding for Elizabeth's wedding dress. It was almost finished and Lizzie looked lovely in it. Polly wished Jack could be there for the wedding. Well, she would just have a good time without him. All the family and friends were coming and it would be wonderful. Except the people didn't know what to say about Jack, and that made it a bit uncomfortable sometimes. They didn't think it was right, his going to Canada and leaving her. Indeed, some of them were outspoken about it. So he still left her. He's still sending money. He still clearly loves her. He's writing letters and stuff, but he still left her. Well, it would pass slowly to be sure, but it would pass. And if they thought he didn't care enough for her, she wished they could see his letters. On second thought, it was a good thing they couldn't. Really, he shouldn't say such things on paper. So he's sexted over letters that take like a month to go back. She walked over to a Chapel Street to buy a can of Ensign tea at Johnny's Morton's grocery stop. It was a beautiful day. She would have liked to walk up to the top of Windmill Brae, one of her favorite places, even in the winter when the wind swept cold and wet over the Bashma Moor. The Bashy Mere, they called it. If you ran towards the moor, you felt as if you might suddenly take wing. It's very windy. She earned herself a look or two if she did that now, at almost 8 months pregnant. As she smiled at the thought, the new bairn gave her a healthy kick under the ribcage. The Tinto Hill was lovely today, just emerging through a veil of blue. The approaching sunlight moving across the land revealed bit by bit the hills and fields and vales between the grand hill and village. Like God creating the earth, the whole Thompson family was out picking strawberries in their garden as she passed down the road. Annie Thompson looked up and waved. They had planted the berries front and back this year. Polly saw many people, including herself, grew strawberries to sell to the jam factory. Well, she mustn't dawdle because Lizzie was looking after wee George. What would she do without her sister? They'd become closer than ever since Jack left. Polly gratefully accepted when Alex McKay stopped and offered a ride most of the way home. Elizabeth, with her nephew in her arms, watched from the window as Polly came down the road. He just got up from his nap and he leaned into her, still heavy with sleep. As Polly passed under the kitchen window, Elizabeth saw the letter poking out from her sister's bag. Here's Mammy, she said, putting the boy down to run and greet Polly. Elizabeth put the kettle on to boil. As soon as they were settled at the table with tea and Baron on his mother's lap, he hated to let out of his sight since Jack left. Polly read the letter. Oh dear, how terrible. Listen to this. Well, Polly, you won't believe the things that happened here in Regina. That's 150 miles from here. There was a terrible cyclone yesterday. It came out of nowhere and flattened blocks and blocks of buildings. And they think 65 people were killed. One man was in the tub when it hit, and the wall of his house blew out, and he went sailing through the air, scrubbing his back. So yeah, that's the Regina tornado that happened. At this, the little boy laughed. The woman too. 3 churches were hit, all brand new. One was completely wrecked. I think it was the Methodist. It makes you wonder. And from what they're telling me about the winters here, maybe a cyclone isn't the worst. I think they exaggerate for us green fellows. They like to rib us. Polly folded the letter. She would read the rest later. Have you guys ever talked to someone who's like new to Canada, has never experienced a winter before? Like, it's like 0 degrees out, -5. They're like, oh, it's so cold. And you're just like, just you wait. That's what's happening here. Poor Jack, what a terrible, hard country, she said, getting up and stroking the fire. Who would want to live there? Cyclones and terrible thunderstorms and those awful winters. Oh, I'll be so glad when he's home again. Elizabeth didn't answer. Polly knew how she felt about Jack Owen, even if she didn't say it. Polly cubed the lamb, salted and peppered it, and dropped it in a sizzling pot with a bay leaf and a leek. Polly's movements, always so quick, were slower and heavier now. She stopped to rub the small of her back as the good smell of browning meat filled the room. But never mind, we've no time for gloomy thoughts. There's going to be a wedding soon. You must try the dress on, Lizzie, and let me have another look. Those tucks aren't sitting quite right. Elizabeth carefully lifted down the white silk dress that hung from the bedroom doorway. And who's the lovely dress shirt on your sewing machine for? Is it father's? She asked. No, that one's for the joiner. The joiner was John's old uncle who's been living with Polly and the boy ever since his house burned down. Polly had given him his dinner every day since she returned from her honeymoon, and she was glad of his company now that Jack was gone. He contributed a little and he helped with the chores. Oh, but won't he be a splendid sight? Elizabeth laughed and went to try on the dress, the fluttering silk skirt brushing the sides of the bedroom doorway. Polly smiled after her sister, happy for her. Archie was a good man, and Polly was glad too for the distraction. Whatever the future held, they had a wedding to prepare for. And so, like a question I have for you guys is: so we know that how come Jack left? Just kind of a quick summary. How come Jack left? John left to go to Canada. Yes, he had some debts. Yeah, he wanted to try and pay back some of the money that he stole from his brother's-in-law's business. Why did he steal that money again? So his brother, his older brother, had stolen money to pay off like debts that he owed on that grocery store. And so what John did was he went to his brother-in-law's greenhouse business. So his wife's brother's greenhouse business, took money from that to give to his older brother to pay off his debts. So he left to go, to get some more money. Why else did he leave? Sorry? Well, he already got in trouble. Like, he's not going to go to jail or anything. But it was really scandalous, right? It was really scandalous. So he wanted to wait till it all blowed over, basically. Because it was embarrassing, right? It was embarrassing for the family that happened to them. So he leaves, he goes to Canada, he's working, he's writing letters all the time, and he sends those to his wife, Polly. Now, when he left, did he have a kid? Yeah, he had Charlie, and he had another one on the way. So he left his pregnant wife, who already had a kid, to go and work. Now it's supposed to be for just a year. So who thinks like he kind of did the right thing? Like that, it's okay that he left there. Like he is sending money back. He is writing faithfully. Who thinks that's okay? So yeah, it's understandable. Again, this happens. We see this a lot even today. Who thinks it was kind of a scumbag move at the time? She's 6 months pregnant. He's leaving a kid behind. Yeah, that tends to be most people's like, oh, I don't know if he could do that. Like he's leaving behind 2 kids for a bit. So really quickly, what I want to do is I just want to do what I like doing with this is you'll get some time to do this later. Like this is just really like some Googling and stuff. But what I want to do is I want to just answer these 2 questions. I also like I want you to leave lots of space at the bottom. We also like doing plot summaries, which is what happened in the story. We're going to be going through this really quickly. It's important we keep track of what is all happening in the story because you will come back to this. So we're really quickly just going to go through, this is on page 10 of your little booklet. This is on chapters 1 to 4. We're just going to be looking at questions 1 and 2. So there's some examples of foreshadowing about Jack or John, about his personality. We've seen a couple of those already. Now, red, make this bigger. One of these had to do with the marriage. So when he proposed, what did he say he would do if Polly declined his marriage offer? He'd blow his brains out. So he asked Polly's father, "Can I marry your daughter?" And if Polly was not allowed to marry him, he would blow his brains out. And now everyone took this as a joke, right? Surely he's joking. Yeah. This is on page 10 of our booklet. Now, a lot of this stuff, this foreshadowing, is going to come specifically from chapter 1. Specifically from chapter 1. Oops, put this there. Oh, sorry. Now, if you guys look at page 8, near the bottom of the page, everyone agreed it was a good match. Jack Wilson was crazy about his wee wife, and the Wilsons were an affectionate, popular couple with a close circle of friends. Polly's family noticed Jack's tendency to lie when it suited his purposes. So we know he lies. So Polly's family noticed that Jack has a tendency to lie when it suits his purposes. Direct quote from the book. Maybe. And all this comes from just chapter 1, the very end of it. So, oh, that's cute. They just got engaged. They just got married. They had a kid. The kid loves his dad and always follows him around, helps him with the chores. And an idyllic life, it would seem, but not for long. Oop, not that. So so this word, idyllic, basically just means it's simple, like it's a nice, simple, peaceful life. So they had a nice, simple, peaceful life, but not for long. This is an instance of foreshadowing at the very end of chapter 1. Oh, I forgot the opinions. He was which? Yeah, that could be a good one. He's moody. You could add that. I think that's fair. Like, one thing I will say is by the end of this book, you will hate this man. So we talked a little bit about this in Canadian studies, and like it's mentioned in the book again, but so why are men being lured to immigrate into the Canadian prairies? 400,000 people in a year. Why?
So that the States that take over Canada.
Yeah, basically, they needed settlers for the land. This was a political reason, right? They needed people for all this land that they've just acquired. And a lot of it was, for protection and stuff like that. But this is ultimately why they needed it. And this was basically to help cement that, nope, this is Canada. Because it was largely empty at this point in time. So they needed settlers for the land. Now, my question to you is, how did they lure these people over? Specifically, these men. How did they lure these men over to Saskatchewan in Canada?
They seem like the greatest thing ever, free land.
Yeah, so they did propaganda. propaganda, a healthy climate, right? Saskatchewan does not have healthy climate. It sucks here a couple months of the year, that's for sure. They gave away free land up to 160 acres. We also know at the time, and this is true, Saskatoon and Regina was the fastest growing city in the world, right? Like the eighth like wonder of like the British Empire or whatever it said there. And not only that, you know, so we have people coming, they want to come for a better life, right? But sometimes it's also to flee scandals at home, right? That's kind of what Jack's doing here, right? There was a scandal at home. He's gonna move and wait for it all to blow over. Oh, I realized I forgot a paragraph. And the final thing we kind of like doing here is just a plot summary. Remember, we want to have more than just a plot, but the plot is still helpful as long as like it understands the timeline that happens in the story. And then we can kind of get like that helps us it'll remind you some of the motives behind it. So the plot summary is just saying what happened in the story, and we don't have to be super detailed here. We're going to keep it really broad. What happened first off? We have Jack and Polly. They got married in 1908. They had Georgie, their kid. I'm going to move this up just a little bit. So they had Georgie, their son. And so Jack's parents die, and ultimately Alex, his oldest brother, gets control of the grocery store. And his oldest brother, Alex, basically steals money for the business, right? And Jack, being the loving, kind brother he is, decides to help his brother out. So what Jack does is Jack stole money from his BIL, brother-in-law, to pay off Alex's debts. So Jack stole money from his brother-in-law, BIL, to steal off his older brother Alex's debts. He gets caught. Oh my God, what a shame. What's he going to do? He leaves to Canada. He leaves to Canada for 1 year, writing weekly. Oh. And finally, he arrives in Saskatoon. And I forgot to read a paragraph, but his second daughter, was it Ella? His second daughter, Ella, is born.
Who leaves to Canada for a year, Jack?
Yeah. Jack. So Jack left for a year because he's escaping the shame of it, right? And to his credit, he is writing weekly. He is sending us a lot of money back home. All right, so that is our plot summary. So in 2 minutes, we will carry on with reading chapter 5, 6, and 7, and we'll leave it off on there. All right. Everyone have that down? No one say no, that means yes. All right, so we're going to read chapters 5, 6, and 7. Hard luck. So we go from the chapter title of Poor Jack to Hard Luck. So based on that, do you think things are going to go swell for him or not swell? Not swell. All right. So Poor Jack. I think that's page 11 or something. No, it's page 17. Poor Jack, chapter 5. V is 5. And so Jack Wilson experienced his first prairie winter, a hard one. He was laid off of his bridge building job in the spring and found work as a gardener in Saskatoon's New Parks. In the fall of 1914, fallen wages, laborers had yet to organize a successful union. High living costs and the acute housing shortage prompted him to move to Prince Albert. Failing wages, high living costs, and a housing shortage. We've never seen that before. It's right now. So he moved to Prince Albert, where he planned to start a tomato growing business, which makes sense, right? Like his brother-in-law owns like a greenhouse. He used to, his family owned a grocery store. That seems to make some logical sense at this time, right? He's in a freaking farm province. So his plan is he's going to make a tomato growing business. No doubt he hoped to emulate the successful market gardens in the Clyde Valley. But at Prince Albert, 90 miles northeast of Saskatoon in a heavily wooded spruce and pine country, the growing season is extremely short. And the moderate, gentle growing conditions of Scotland are not the ways of Saskatchewan. On a muggy afternoon in July 1914, a black sky overlaid with a billowing ochre white clouds rolled over the garden and cabin in the clearing, and he heard a sudden shocking clamor of hailstones banging the roof and rattling down the tin chimney. Jack watched in disbelief from the doorway of his one-room shack as huge hailstones leapt and danced crazily among the rows and rows of tomato plants, pounding his hopes as flat as the crop. So a massive thunderstorm comes and just obliterates his work. This is the middle of July. He's been planting for months at this point in time. He stood among the ruined plants, shaking his fist at the sky as clouds passed over, uncovering a watery sun. All the outdoor work in the past 2 years had given him a deceptively healthy glow. Deceptively healthy. right? Deceive him. He put some muscle on his slim frame since he left from home, but his expression was bleak. Once again, things had gone wrong for Jack Wilson. He had hardly rented the Poly since leaving Saskatoon. So he left, where did it say he left? Fall. So he left in the fall of 1914. And then shortly after, his dreams kind of get washed up here. So then, like the last month or two, he has not written the Poly, and he used to be writing weekly at this point. So he did not write the Poly since leaving Saskatoon, and not to any of his family for more than a year. He felt disconnected. He felt disconnected from the old country and everyone in it. But what did he have here? A shack with a stove, a bed, a table, a chair, and a half acre of tomato sauce. He couldn't take a winter in this place. His lungs would never stand it. Now were the prospects good anywhere, nor were the prospects good anywhere he could see. The incredible building boom had already burst with the collapse of the railway construction in 1913. The inevitable result of too many railways and too much building too fast. What with rising prices and a 3-year drought, the downturn was sudden and hard, leaving thousands like himself unemployed. And in the railway center of Moose Jaw, Jack knew the soup kitchen line stretched for blocks. It would be the same everywhere else. In the east, lines of men waited at the railway freight sheds, shipyards, anywhere they might get a few hours work. There was no welfare, no relief, and men coming west looking for work found more of the same. So this is where we're starting to get into basically the Great Depression, or a little bit before it. Specifically in Saskatchewan, the drought, we're a farming province, right? A 3-year drought devastating to the economy here. Remember, like in Canadian studies, we learned about the economy. Most of your jobs are about supporting those primary industries. So the second that all that drought happens, no one's able to farm anything like good. Like no one's farming anything. All of these jobs just collapse, and we still have people flooding in looking for work. Jack could only see one solution. War in Europe seemed inevitable, and joining up would provide him with a ticket back overseas. He didn't relish going back with his tail between his legs, nor did he want to go to war, but enlisting would be a way to get back without losing face, right? He cares about his reputation. This is why he left. Yeah, in a year, people will forget all about it. So he really cares about his reputation. The only way really, if it came, he would go. So his plan is, I'm going to enroll for the army, and then I'm just going to desert the army and go back home. This is World War I. Yeah. Yeah. And like at this time, like war in Europe seemed inevitable. People kind of wanted a war. Like countries wanted a war in this case. And in a lot of, like, it was glorified in a lot of ways. Like, oh yeah, I can't wait to go to war. Like this is when before it was where you have a bunch of people line up and just shoot at each other, and that's it. That's war. And you go on horses. World War I, of course, is planes, tanks, machine guns, like devastation not known ever. Yeah. So like people didn't know what they were signing up for. 80% of people who first signed up like from World War I at the start died by the end of it. So you were dead if you signed up at the start. So war was declared on August 4th, 1914, when Jack Wilson was working on a neighboring farm. Britain's ultimatum to Germany demanding its withdrawal from Belgium expired, and the British Empire, including Canada, was at war. So by default, Canada's at war. Canada was no reluctant warrior. Young men couldn't join up fast enough. If everyone said it was a just cause, then it must be so. And if your country thought you were worth $1.10 a day, that's a lot of money back in the day. They're in really hard economic times. $1.10 in the day, 110 years ago. So much the better. In those delirious early days, there was no need for conscription. That would come later. All the pundits of times were predicting a short, decisive war. Anyone know how long World War I lasted? About 5 years. Yeah. Short. They thought the war would be done in 2 months. We'll be home in Christmas. It'll be fine. Nope, 5 years. If massed armies didn't settle the issue quickly, economic collapse surely would. Men swarmed to the recruiting offices, afraid the war would be over before they could get there. From farms and small communities all over the West they came, by any means available. One young Englishman, homesteaded near Rosetown, walked 80 miles to Saskatoon in his well-ventilated overalls to enlist. Exultant patriotic demonstrations erupted, and just 10 days after war was declared, Saskatoon cheered its first volunteers on their way. With bands playing and flags waving, the crowd at the Canadian Pacific Railroad depot was so thick the men had difficulty boarding and their train was delayed an hour. In the East, excitement soared even higher. The country went mad. People were singing in the streets and roads. Everyone wanted to be a hero. According to one veteran, I wanted to be a hero too, but I wasn't big enough. 5'0" and weighed 85 pounds and was a Boy Scout burglar. I was 19, but looked 15. I was sworn in, tested, inoculated, and in half an hour, I'm in the army. I lay awake all night thinking, what have I done? And I went away in my first suit. I paid $1 for it, and it almost fell off me. When asked what training was like, he laughed. Oh God, what training? The training amounted to being equipped with the old South African equipment, which is like notorious for being like faulty. Some of it was moldy, a leather bag, a haversack, a water bottle, and a Ross rifle. What a bastard. Germans coming on in mass, and the rifle wouldn't fire. The bolt wouldn't close. The steel wasn't tempered. They'd try to drive it open and they'd blow their brains out. So like, hey, you 5'0", 80-pound man, here's a moldy gun that doesn't fire. Go to war. In early October, 32,000 ill-trained soldiers left for England. As soon as he heard the war was declared, John headed for Prince Albert to enlist, but he was rejected for his weak lungs. So war gets declared, he immediately goes to sign up. Immediately, no hesitation. I'm going, and they say no. His lungs are too weak. You remember why his lungs were too weak? It was in like the very first page of the book. Sorry? I think it was bronchitis. He got sick when he was a kid, which I'm pretty sure it was bronchitis, if I recall correctly. So he never had good lungs. Never. Sorry? I think back in the day, it may have been like if you're like a really young child, possibly. I'm gonna guess it's not guaranteed, but like some cases probably. But yeah, he's always had really bad lungs. And so, well, it could be asthma too. Like we didn't know it existed at the time. And also keep in mind, what's this disease that we know is going to come in the prologue? What disease was emerging in Canada? Spanish flu. Foreshadowing. 2 weeks later, while walking down the main street in Prince Albert, a poster on the side of the livery stable caught his eye. The Royal Northwest Mounted Police were looking for recruits. There were certain requirements, literacy, height, and so on, which he fulfilled. He went straight to their Prince Albert detachment to inquire about enlisting. They sent him to their doctor for an examination, and he passed. Although it's unlikely his health had improved dramatically in 2 weeks, the problem apparently didn't render him unfit for the Mounties. Remember, the Mounties, this is the company that's like, you guys are bricklayers? You're a cop now. In August 1914, the month Wilson joined the RNWMP, Royal Northwest Mounted Police, in anticipation of difficulties with the large foreign-born population in the West, increased the size of the force by 500 men. And so with so many of their men joining the armed forces when their term was up, the Royal Northwest Mounted Police was desperately in need of recruits, right? So they're desperate to fill this up because all of their current cops left to go to the war. So they like, he should have failed this physical, right? Like the army wouldn't take him. His lungs are too bad. A 5'0", 80-pound guy got enlisted. He couldn't. His lungs are too bad, but they didn't care because they're like, we need guys. Holy crap, we need guys. The war was only one of the reasons for a mass exodus of men from the ranks of the mounted police. Almost no one whose term expired in 1914 and early 1915 re-engaged with the force. Most joined the war effort and headed overseas. The dismally low wages, poor housing, and daunting workload were also factors. Men were expected to be on duty 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for low wages. 60 cents a day for new men and $1 a day after 8 years service. How much were you getting paid in the military? $1.10. You get paid way more money to enlist for a war that's going to be over in 2 months. At least that's what you thought at the time. For the same, yeah. The same was paid elsewhere for unskilled labor. So cops were not paid a lot at all at this point in time. By the time Wilson joined, the force was manned largely by new arrivals from the United Kingdom, lured by recruiting officers and the publicity that painted such a romantic picture of the men in scarlet. Propaganda. Jack Wilson, however, was grateful for the reprieve. He arrived at the Depot Division, Regina, for training. At the age of 30, he had a new chance in life. He excelled to become an officer of the law. So remember, one thing we've established at this point is John Wilson, Jack Wilson, really cares about his reputation, right? He cares about his reputation. He was going to go to the army. He's the only way he could respectfully come back home, and he couldn't do that either. So he's going to do this next best thing. Chapter 6, news. To Polly, as to many others, events were spiraling out of control. One might think that nothing in her life had prepared her for living daily with fear and uncertainty, and yet everything in her life had prepared her for it. Her strong religious upbringing had instilled in her an unshakable faith in God, and she needed it now. And as she needed the cheerful, optimistic nature, she was born. Jack's letters, which had once arrived weekly and sometimes more often, were now few and far between. Remember, the second he left for Prince Albert, he stopped writing to her. Do we have any guesses why? Yeah, he was trying to start this little farm. He couldn't find any work in Saskatoon, so he went up north to try and start farming. He cares about his reputation, right? Sorry? It would have cost a little bit of money, but not that much. It's going all the time. There's lots of letters that go in overseas, so it's quite cheap, even as cheap as today, actually. Yeah. One of the big reasons here, how come he stopped writing, is because, well, he went from a really successful worker. He had lots of money, sending money home all the time, to now he doesn't have work. He doesn't have money. So he's doing it to kind of uphold his reputation, right? He doesn't want to be the guy who's going to write home and it's like, oh, I know I've been sending you a lot of money, but now I'm unemployed here too. So months apart sometimes. So months apart. They've not gotten letters for months. The children were growing so fast, made her so sad to think he'd never seen little Ella, who was running all over. When does a kid run? Or we'll walk, I guess. Anyone have a really young sibling? When did they start walking? About a year-ish. It's different, but that's around the time. This is 1914, the fall of 1914. When did he come? When did he come to Saskatchewan? He came in 1912. So he's been here for 2 years now at this point. He promised to be here for 1 year. So, and George didn't ask about his father so much anymore. Has he sent you any money lately? Asked Elizabeth, who came by every day after school. As much as he could manage, I'm sure. That meant precious little or none. It was easier for Elizabeth to visit since Polly needed every minute she could spare from the children for sewing. Sometimes she was always in progress on her sewing machine in the corner. As soon as the war is over, he'll be home. I know, Polly said. That might be a long time, Elizabeth said. Then, seeing the look on her sister's face, said, what are you sewing now, Polly? Isn't it a beautiful color, just like a peacock's feather? Yes, isn't it? It's Margaret Stewart's wedding dress. Oh, won't she be lovely in that color? Most of the girls aren't bothering with wedding dresses, are they? With so many boys going to France. No, thank goodness. I can hardly keep up now, along with the piecework Mr. Grossart sent me. Bless his kind heart. Polly got up and took a Johnny cake from the stove. It made Elizabeth sad to see how thin and tired she looked. People have been so good to me, Lizzie. Doesn't Father always say we reap what we sow? It's your turn to reap, that's all. The kitchen door opened and the joiner came in, stamped his feet on the mat. He grinned at Elizabeth and Polly and wiped an arthritic hand over his wet white hair. Something smells good. Jack's two sisters had offered to take him in after his house burned, but his answer was, nay, I'll gain away with Polly. I'll just gain away with Polly. The old carpenter had presented her with his most prized possession, his stuffed, only slightly singed pet fox. It stood on the hearth with one paw lifted, its head turned, and its spiteful, beady eyes fixed on whatever was going in the room. The dog's hair stood on end, and he growled every time he caught sight of it, to the joiner's great amusement. He hung his jacket by the back door and placed his rubber boots neatly under it. By the Lord Harry, that's a cold rain out there. And then with a little smile at Polly, he pulled a letter from under his sweater. There you go, lassie, a letter from your Johnny. And speaking of Johnny, Elizabeth laughed and cut the cake. Johnny, or Polly, hungry for a word from Jack, was already lost in a letter. Oh, listen to Jack's news, she cried. I tried to join up, but the doctor said my lungs don't sound so good, and they turned me down. Then I heard the Mounties were wanting men, so I applied and they accepted me. Now, what do you think of that, Polly? You're Jack Boy, a mounted policeman. Right? He's saying it with pride, right? I'll be training here in Regina, and then they'll send me out to a detachment. I thought I could ride a horse till I got here, but they're pleased at my marksmanship. They won't be paying much, but you'll be getting a separate separation allowance every month, and I'll send you as much as I can. At least I'll get food and lodging and a bed. I hope. The place is overflowing with recruits, and they ran out of mattresses, so I sleep on the bare boards with just a wee bit of padding. But it's steady work, and people really look up to the Mounties here. I hear they'll be sending a cavalry unit overseas, so maybe you'll see me sooner than you think. So people look up to the Mounties. Maybe you'll see me soon. Polly looked at Joyner and Elizabeth for reassurance. His lungs can't be too bad, can they? If they took him in the police force. My, won't he look handsome in a Mountie's uniform? Polly's step was lighter as she went to get the children from their afternoon nap. And okay, and chapter 7. Now, won't he look handsome in a Mountie's uniform? She's in Scotland, right? She's in a small town in Scotland. She knows what a Mountie in Canada looks like. Again, we are sending so much propaganda out to try and get people over here. Chapter 7, Blaine Lake. Anyone been to Blaine Lake? It's in Saskatchewan. It is. I'll just load it up on Google Maps. So Blaine Lake. So it's north of Sask. We got Saskatoon here. We got Prince Albert all the way up here, and Blaine Lake's kind of in the middle of them. So it's like halfway to PA, basically, right here. So not that far from Saskatoon, not that far from PA. So Blaine Lake, chapter 7. In the town of Blaine Lake, everyone noticed the new policeman who arrived in July 1915. When did he arrive to Canada? 1912. We are now year 3. Jack Wilson cut a striking figure in the Royal Northwest Mounted Police uniform. His training had been intensive. Months of foot drills, physical training, self-defense, small arms, explosives, first aid, riot control, prohibition maintenance, and police community relations. And every aspect of horsemanship had been practiced over and over till man and horse were one. And finally, graduation. Wilson had proudly recited the oath, I will faithfully, diligently, and impartially execute and perform my duties in the Royal Northwest Mounted Police without fear, favor, or affection towards any person or party, so help me God. He proudly recited the oath. So he's really proud to be this, right? He's really proud to be a cop. Oops. And his reward for all that hard work, a badge pinned to his tunic, inscribed with the motto of the force, maintain Detroit, uphold the right. And that was exactly what he intended to do, uphold the right. The duties of his new job took him away from Blaine Lake on a variety of missions, scouting for stills and on lunatic detail, the apprehension and transportation of the insane to the Saskatchewan hospital at North Battleford. He also followed up every lead on the activities of suspected enemy aliens, often to find that someone with a grievance had tried to make trouble for his immigrant neighbor. Many of these people were suspects simply because of their surnames. A colony of Dubicors had set up in the Blaine Lake area and kept a watch on their activities was a primary responsibility of the local Mountie. So they would know what this is. Dubicors. Russians. So those are Russian immigrants. So one of the jobs of him as a cop, his official duty, is he needs to watch over these Russians. He tried to get along with them since they were displeased with his interference, such as his insistence that they send their children to schools. They flaunt off all their clothes, no matter what the temperature or circumstances, and sometimes set things on fire. So you got to send your kids to school, You can't be naked. Stop burning stuff. In Blaine Lake, Corporal Wilson was housed in a small building on Main Street, what the town council had purchased for this purpose. The accommodation must have been considered inadequate since the secretary wrote the district office in Prince Albert about the possibility of new quarters for the mounted police. Councils were instructed to interview Dr. Borgal about purchasing his house for police purposes, but apparently the good doctor didn't wish to part with it. Blaine Lake was a vigorous, forward-looking town serving a large area between Saskatoon and Prince Albert. It boasted a large hotel, a bank, a school, 3 livery stables, pharmacy, 2 cafes, a pool table, an implement dealer, which I don't know what that is, a lumber yard, and other businesses. 2 dance halls often held rival dances on Saturday nights, while stores and businesses stayed open until 11 p.m. to accommodate farmers. The downtown wooden sidewalks were a constant headache for council, with the horse-drawn vehicles always breaking the crossings down and Hitchens post reins in the sidewalk impeding foot traffic. Other new arrivals in Blaine Lake in 1915 included John and Allison Patterson, farmers who moved there with their 4 children, Mac, James, Jesse, and Kate. John Patterson purchased the library stable owned by R.B. Brian Horner, one of Saskatchewan's most colorful figures. Horner had come west from Quebec on a harvest excursion in 1906 and settled in the area. At the age of 23, he began to import breeding horses from the large horse farms in the east, spending most of his winters traveling between Saskatchewan and Quebec, bringing back carloads of horses. It took 2 weeks to make the journey one way, he said. I was always on the train in those days. The return fare from Saskatoon to Shawville, Quebec was about $17. Traveling with RB and the horses was a ticket to adventure for many young men from both provinces, and the arrival by train of these spirited purebred horses were exciting events. Horner later went into politics, eventually becoming the first director for Saskatchewan of the Canadian National Railway and a senator. The Patterson's house was next door to the barn where Jack Wilson stabled his horse. So that's how he gets to meet these people. Is they bought the horse, like the stables that the senator owned, and he stored his horse there from his policing duties. In summer of 1916, so now we're in 1916, 4 years later, John Patterson, an affable man, invited the new Mountie home for supper, and there he met Jessie, a willowy 16-year-old with a lovely high cheekboned face and thick brown hair. Gradually, their house became the place he gravitated to when he had time to spare, and an extra place was often set at their table when Jack returned from his excursions from the countryside. So basically, he got invited into like this new family. The Pattersons arrived in 1915, and he eventually becomes like part of their family. He was grateful for the Pattersons' kindness. His Spartan accommodation did not feel much like a home, and the job was a lonely one. Mounties were forbidden to speak to the public about their work or the workings of the Royal Northwest Mounted Police in general. And this secretiveness, while adding to the mystique, isolated its members. The policy earned the Northwesterners the title of the Silent Force. Wilson also said nothing about his wife and children back in Scotland. People in Blaine Lake, including the Pattersons, assumed he was single and didn't set the record straight. So he generally tried to keep to himself, except when he went there for supper and stuff. He didn't talk about his work a lot. He never mentioned his wife and kids back home. Probably because he really cares about his reputation, right? He doesn't want to be seen as this guy who escaped all of his problems. Yeah. So again, some foreshadowing here. It has now been more than 4 years since he had left Scotland, and Jack Wilson's letters had slowed to a trickle. He felt he had done all he could do to get back home. He had tried to enlist to get back to the old country. He'd hoped that he'd be sent overseas. His hopes that he'd be sent overseas with the Mounties was dimming, and on his wages, he'd never be able to bring his family to Canada. But he had tried. Hadn't he always tried? Things just seemed to go against him. So he felt he had done all he could to get back home. Do you think he has done that? What other options could he do? He tried to enlist in the army. He couldn't bring his family over. Sorry? He could try and stow away there. Is there any other possibilities he could do to get back home? Well, he could just buy a ticket home. He can just buy a ticket, but how come he doesn't want to do that? Make him look like a failure, right? He cares about his reputation. He could just quit his job and buy a ticket back home. He could do that. He would need to get a job back home too, yeah. Sorry? But yeah, at least he'd be with his family, right? It's been 4 years now. He hasn't even met one of his children. It could be. Mm-hmm. So we are eventually going to analyze stuff like this and like, is this him being deceptive or did he actually try? Like, to his credit, the second the war started, he was at that office, right? So he did try a little bit, but maybe he could have done more. So we get to kind of argue now, well, is this just him being a dick or did he actually try? But after feeling like a failure, he had found something he was good at, something with a certain cachet. People looked up to him. Wilson was not the only lawman in the area. S.D. Jones, the first town constable, had been hired in 1912 at $15 a month, 50 cents a day, to maintain law and order in the village. It's to be hoped that there was not much lawlessness and disorder in Blaine Lake, since Jones's others duties included repairing sidewalks and crossings, collecting pole and dog taxes, the collection and payment of licenses, inspections of weeds, maintenance of water pumps and fire apparatus, ringing the curfew bell 3 times a day, inspecting buildings, enforcing the pound bylaw, taking care of street lamps, putting in a hitchhiking post, collecting and recharging fire extinguishers, inspecting sanitary conditions, and planting peonies in the schoolyards. So like, he does a lot more than just police, right? There's not really any crime here, so he does all these other things. He's kind of like the town's handyman. Not John Wilson, but this guy S.D. Jones, just like the town handyman. Although the local Mounties was in charge of the area of the, although the local Mountie was in charge of the rural area rather than the village, his presence did help to keep law and order. S.D. Jones must have been grateful. At the time of Wilson's arrival, Blaine Lake was not a dry town. That's referring to alcohol, right? We are now in the Prohibition era, where you can't drink, theoretically. In July 1911, the village had passed a bylaw prohibiting the sale of intoxicating liquors, which resulted in tragedy in November of 1912. 3 men working on the railway grade stabled their horses, then bought a bottle of alcohol, told the men wanted it for rubbing down horses. The druggist gave them wood alcohol, which the men promptly drank. 2 died in a livery barn, and another was found in a granary a few miles away. He had choked trying to cool his throat and stomach with a mouthful of grain. In December 1913, a vote repealing the bylaw passed 185 to 5. How do you die? How do 3 men die drinking a bottle of?
It's not like
Yeah. Yeah, not all alcohol is suited for consumption, right? One of it is like, this is like almost pure alcohol for one thing, like 95%. So you can give yourself alcohol poisoning, but also, it can stop you from absorbing oxygen. Like it can kind of like, you just exhale in it. It can kind of like enter into your lungs. Like, has anyone ever like seen alcohol try to evaporate? Like it's stopping you just from breathing entirely. And so one of it is you could get alcohol poisoning. One is like it can stop you from breathing, and the other one is it's like it's not digested the way most alcohol is. It's not filtered the same way. You just die. This is why you can only drink certain things. Oh, sorry. I don't know what this one was, but I'm gonna guess this was like 95, 100% alcohol. Like it's a rubbing alcohol. Yeah, like I think we've banned Everclear in the province. Like it's so dangerous, and that's one you can technically drink. Mm-hmm. So they banned alcohol. This is the fancy way of saying they banned alcohol, right? It's dangerous. Although it wasn't a crime to drink liquor, it was against the law to make it, but many did in stills hidden in the hilly, heavily wooded areas around Blaine Lake. We know prohibition was a failure. People just made their own moonshine. Wilson, snooping around on his black horse or on foot, became an unwelcome and all too familiar sight. So he went from a really well-respected guy to, oh, that bastard's trying to stop me from drinking. After fulfilling his disparate duties, Jax found himself gravitating towards the Patterson's house and to Jesse. More and more often at those rival Saturday night dances, Jesse looked over the shoulder of a dance partner to where a uniformed Jack Wilson stood at the back of the hall. His feelings for her, their feelings for each other, were becoming serious. So probably good foreshadowing here that's happening. Now I want to take a step back. I want to go back one page. So we have Jesse Hutchinson, right? Sorry, Jesse Patterson. Jesse Patterson. This is who he's starting to develop some feelings about. What's our description of her? Jesse, a willowy 16-year-old with lovely high cheekbones, face, and thick brown hair. So she's 16. How old is Jack? 30. He did say he was 30. I think at this point he's like 32.
That's literally half his age.
She is literally half this man's age. Now, not outrageously uncommon at this point in time, but this is still eyebrow raising, right? Like this happened at around that time period, but like that's still a little odd, right? Like, yeah. So in 1916, Wilson tried for a second time to enlist. So he tried again. To enlist, and his plan is, I'm going to enlist, they're going to send me over, I'm going to desert, and I'm going to go to my wife. He was rejected again. Later, he would say that he had wished to leave for Jesse's sake. So he wished to leave for Jesse's sake. What does that mean? Sorry? It is everyone assumes that he is single. No one knows about his family. Yeah, he's trying to maybe like spare her feelings, right? He's recognizing he's in a bad situation right now. He's trying to exit this situation. Like I said, you will hate this man by the end of this book. It was also around this time that talk surfaced in Blaine Lake that Wilson was a married man. So now we start getting rumor mill. Now keep in mind, this is in the early 1900s. Rumors exist. Given his record of running away from self-made predicaments, his motives may not have been entirely selfless. Foreshadowing. So he tries to run away. His excuse is, I'm going to try, I'm just trying to spare Jesse, the 16-year-old's feelings. But whenever he runs away, he's trying to like escape something, right? So he's trying to run away here. He's trying to escape something. All right. Chapter 8. Over there. The war Wilson tried to get to had very early become a war of attrition, of trying to outlast your opponent. By autumn 1914, a military deadlock had been reached on both the eastern and western fronts, with opposing armies dug into deep trenches in the hard clay. We see the beginning of trench warfare. These they fortified with everything they could: thick, tangled barbed wire, boulders, sandbags, mortar batteries, and machine gun nests. Backed by support lines and heavy artillery, the men in the trenches faced the open space of no man's land, and beyond that, the enemy. And again, to give you some understanding here, you step into no man's land, you almost certainly die, because you have like 1,000 machine guns just raining fire on you. So it's become a war where nothing happens. It's a war of attrition. You can't send a bunch of guys over because they'll just get mowed down. They can't send guys over because you'll mow them down. You're stuck in your trenches. By the time the war ended, 5 years later, the labyrinth network of trenches would stretch all the way from Belgian coast to Switzerland, a distance of more than 600 miles. On this western front, Canadians fought and died by the tens of thousands. Again, those who enlisted right when they first could almost certainly died by the war's end. That first contingent made up the largest convoy of men, horses, and equipment to cross the Atlantic. The convoy included a regiment from the still separate British Dominion of Newfoundland. After a winter training on the Salisbury Plain, the men were keen for battle, desperate to escape the cold, unrelenting drizzle on that sodden English plain. They didn't know what lay ahead. At the Second Battle of Ypres and St. Julien, the Germans unleashed poison gas, mustard gas. The Canadians, violently ill, gasping for air through mud-soaked handkerchiefs and struggling with jammed Ross rifles, held the lines against all odds until fresh troops arrived. The cost was horrendous. In those 48 hours, 6,035 Canadians, one man in every three, was lost from Canada's small force of poorly trained men. 1 in 3 guys in the entire country who enlisted died in 2 days. And in the days and years ahead, worse was to come. In one horrific battle, the Somme offensive, called Das Blutbad, the bloodbath by the Germans, was the first Newfoundland regiment, was virtually annihilated in less than half an hour. In one day, 57,000 British and Canadian soldiers were were killed, wounded, or missing. Apart from sending its young men off to the horrors of war, Saskatchewan saw its main role in the war effort as that of the food provider. Saskatchewan is the bread box of the country and the world. They're providing food. You need food to send the guys who are in the middle of a war. The war had ended the depression in agriculture. With huge armies in the trenches, the government needed all Canada could produce, and employers and farmers soon regretted that so many men had been encouraged to enlist. The demand drove prices up, and wisdom that might have left the dry land of the Palace of Triangle to graze in was abandoned in favor of wheat growing. The government, desperate for wheat, encouraged unsound farming practices, such as crop growing on stubble land. The war and its consequent labor shortage charged many other things also. The Imperial Munitions Board employed 250,000 Canadians, among them 40,000 women. Women's lives were changing. Polly Wilson's life, however, was in limbo. In the windy, rainy Scottish village, another year had gone by with her husband still away. His letters had stopped, and no one in the family had heard from him since the beginning of the war. So remember, right now we're in 1914, 1915, 1916. We are 4 years after he arrived. They have not heard from him. The war started in 1914. They have not heard from Jack Wilson for 2 years. Now, and let's give some context here. So the last letter she got, hey, I'm going to be a police officer. I tried to enlist for the army, but they said, no, my lungs are too bad. And now I haven't heard from him in 2 years. Now, if you're the wife, what do you think might have happened to your husband?
Die.
Probably die, right? Polly feared for, oh yeah.
And then he comes back for some reason, and when he gets jealous, and he goes and
Let's find out.
let's stop. It's like, no way you were really out here when she has every right to do that.
So Polly feared greatly for her husband's health. He was not well. He'd said in his last letter, his lungs again. Hurrying down the long, windy road to Carluke with more piecework for Mr. Gossart flapping in her arms, she thought about Jack. Such strange work he had to do, taking madmen and women to that hospital for the insane. Sometimes they were dangerous, and he'd been bitten and kicked trying to put clothes back on those crazy Russian people. What were they called? So again, one of his primary responsibilities is looking over these Russian people, basically the nudists. Dubicors, Polly thought she'd never heard anything so strange as those large people who wanted to run around naked and set fire to things. It seemed as if a lot of people over there were going mad. Well, it wasn't the whole world when you thought about it. So the last letter she had is that, yeah, I'm watching over these crazy Russian naked guys who set fire to stuff, and my lungs are really bad. 2 years ago, that's what she heard. So, probably dead. She certainly wasn't alone. Whenever she started feeling sorry for herself, she only had to look at the black armbands, at the anguish and heartache on the faces of mothers, fathers, wives, and children too, since so many married men were going now. Margaret Stewart, who hadn't been wed long enough to get used to calling herself by her married name, was a widow with a bairn to raise on her own. And so many returned men would never be the same. If you're in that trench for years, like, you see unspeakable horrors, right? Polly had written to Jack about William Angus, who was wounded 40 times as he crawled into no man's land to rescue his friend, James Martin. Jack had grown up with both these men. Watching poor William receive his Victoria Cross had made her so sad. He seemed to not even know what all the crowd and cheering were about. Polly passed the shop with a black ribbon wreath on the door. It was madness, the men of the world lining up to kill each other. And the Lithuania, she hadn't forgotten those heartbreaking pictures in the paper. One of the baron about Ella's age, washed up on the shore in his wee Lord Fauntleroy suit. Sister Mary Botchin from Slammin, who at 26 was 3 years younger than Polly, went down with the Lithuania on her way to the Red Cross nursing duty in France. Just imagine that great ship torpedoed and gone in 20 minutes, 1,200 civilians drowning. It didn't bear thinking about. And the Kaiser declaring a holiday and the Germans dancing in the streets. Perhaps it's just as well Jack was safe in Canada. So the fact he got denied, kind of a blessing in disguise, right? He would most certainly be dead if they did let him in. And to his credit, he did try to sign up again in 1916. So all this stuff is happening. Men are getting thrown into this meat grinder. They're dying instantly. He tries to sign up again and denied. His lungs are still too bad. Like, they need guys at this point, right? Like, everyone's dying and they still say, no, your lungs are too bad. Here we go. If only he was well, if only he would write. The wind tore her clothes and hair, pulling up the garment she carried in her arms. As the first drop of rain spotted the cobblestones, she hurried in her steps. She mustn't get the clothes wet. The big umbrella she carried would be useless in this wind. Polly tapped on the windows at the Grossart Drapers, and Mr. Grossart hurried to open the door for her, taking some of the clothing from her arms. Ah, Polly, you're a wonder. How would I get along without you? I suspect better than I would without you and the work you give me out of the kindness of your heart, Polly said, laying the things out on the big work table in the back and starting to hang them up. Nonsense, my dear. You turn the finest seam in the county and you know it. Mr. Grossart took her pay envelope from under the tray in the cash register. And have you heard? She shook her head. And what have you got for me this week? She asked brightly. Soon their heads were bent over the new work. So that's the end of chapter 8. We're gonna pause there. We will go for a break in 2 minutes. Before that, I just want to talk about what Polly's position's in right now. So we're in about 1916 here, right? The war's been going on for about 2 years now. Does she have a good life right now, you think? No, her husband's gone. She might think that he's dead. She hasn't heard from him in 2 years. She has 2 kids. And she doesn't even have a lot of money. She's painfully thin at this point, right? She doesn't have a lot of work. The only work she has is this guy giving it to her. So we'll go for a break here. When we come back, we'll talk about chapter 8 here. So 5 to 7. So how come so many of the young men are willing to enlist in the war? There was this fear of what? How come people were signing up for the war in droves?
Because they feared that they'd be weak if they didn't.
Partly, like, we want to make sure we raise an army. We are officially at war. Like, Canada is at war legally, because we're a British colony at this time. But all these young men, they're signing up for war because they're afraid that something's going to happen if they wait. So partly they're afraid the war is going to be over before it starts. The reason they're signing up so quick is because, remember, this is supposed to be a war that's done by Christmas, right? They are afraid the war will be over before they get there, which is why they're not getting trained. We're not waiting for proper supplies. Here's a rifle that doesn't shoot. Here's a moldy backpack, and we're not going to train you. That way you can make sure you get there in time before the war is over. So they're afraid the war will be over before they can get there. And the ironic part that ends up happening here is that the war lasts 5 years. Yes. Well, at a mass scale like this, like there's been people have they'd throw disease-ridden corpses on catapults and stuff, but to this scale, yeah, this is the first time we see gas used as a weapon. Yeah. Yeah. I guess that's more bacterial warfare. Bacterial warfare has existed for a long time, but chemical warfare, no, this is the first time of chemicals, I guess. Yeah. So yeah, so they're really afraid the war is going to be over, and they die. Most die, to be blunt. Remember, a third of these men died in 2 days in one battle. This is why eventually it turned into such a long war, is because the second you take those guys out of those trenches, they are dead. So that's why everyone just sat in the trenches the entire war. They all have their own reasons. It was good money at the time. There was some economic troubles. They wanted glory. There was a lot of people who were passionate about the British Empire too. Like, this is really early Canada, a lot of loyalists out there. So there's different reasons, but ultimately, I got to get there before it's too late. And then they mostly died. So we know that John, so how come John eventually ended up joining the police force? Sorry? Right. So one of the reasons was because, so John or Jack, so John tried to enlist for the war, declined for bad lungs. And he sees a poster for the Royal Northwest Mounted Police, and he enlists. He met the requirements. And the requirements were, can you read, and are you a tall male? Essentially, that's what the requirements are.
So maybe the tallest part just be like an intimidation factor,
I think it's just to make sure, like, you need to be able to
or maybe.
well, yeah, like there's physical activities of the job. Yeah. Like, you need to be able to, like, overpower like a fugitive or something too. So like the expectation is you're going to be able to carry a certain amount of weight and stuff like that. So he meets this Royal Northwest Mounted Police, but remember, there's lots of spots right now in this force. How come there's so many spots available? Yeah, there was a max exodus of men. Most of the enrolled officers signed up for the war, which makes sense, right? Because this job has poor pay and lots of training and long hours. You are working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 60 cents a day. Army paid $1.10 a day. Oh, sorry, I'm blocking someone's view. Mm-hmm. And there's also a mass, so there's a mass recruitment effort. Sorry, I'm blocking stuff. So that's because lots of people are leaving, but also because they're getting all those people, all those new people coming into the all these foreign-born population coming into the province. So they're worried that's going to bring crime. There's a tinge of racism in there for sure. Like, well, if you bring all these undesirables in, that's going to bring all their crime and stuff. Because, so remember, they sent propaganda, right? How come they wanted like British people so much? They sent all this propaganda to the UK. Polly knew what a Mountie looked like. They'd only been around for a couple of years. She's in like rural Scotland. She knows what a Mountie looks like, because they're trying to get white English speaking people to come first. That's who they want to fill up the prairies. So there is an oath he has to recite to get it. Lots of professions have oaths and stuff like that. The Royal Northwest one, this is on page 23, was, and I'm going to be honest with you, you don't have to actually fully write this down if you don't want to. I'm going to write it down just because I care more about the irony part of this. So if you don't want to, you can just write it's on page 23, and that's fine. But I will faithfully, diligently, and impartially execute and perform my duties without fear, favor, or affection towards any person or party. So this oath here, he says a couple things, right? He's going to be faithful, he's going to be diligent, and he's going to impartially execute, which means impartially execute means he'll do his job without like, everyone's equal of like consequence, right? Like, I don't get a warning for a speeding ticket, but you get the ticket, right? He's going to be fair. So there's some irony here. Faithfully. Is John Wilson a faithful man? No. Is he a faithful man? No. He has we know he eventually gets feelings for Jesse. So he is not a faithful man. Is he a diligent man? So diligent, so like diligent is basically like yeah, really hard worker.
Yeah.
I think that's fair. Like he probably. Yeah. Right. Like so basically like diligent means you're working hard, but also you're doing things really carefully with a lot of planning and forethought behind it.
Yeah.
And then impartially execute, which means no favor towards one person or another. Do you think that's okay? The big one here really is the faithful. You can make claims either way at this point in the story for diligence or impartialness. We don't know too much about it right now. Like you could make an argument that he's not diligent, or you could make an argument that he is diligent. We will shed light on whether those are like, his true character as we go deeper and deeper. But right now, the faithful part, absolutely not. Sorry? He does try. He tries to enlist again. But some people argue it could have been an excuse. Maybe he knows he'd get declined because of his lungs, but maybe the army's desperate enough now. So he has his feelings for Jesse, but also faithfulness. He left behind a wife and 2 kids. And again, there's arguments you can make here. He was trying to find work and stuff like that. You're going to be able to make arguments either one way or the other, but typically most people eventually dislike this man.
Oh, yeah.
So next question here is, how does John rationalize his departure and absence from Scotland and Polly? Now, rationalize is, he's trying to provide like justification. Like, yeah, I stole that loaf of bread because my family was hungry, right? That's rationalizing it. That's justifying it. How does he justify? He left behind Scotland. He left behind Polly. He left behind his family. He left behind his kids. What reasons does John say that? How does he justify it? Yeah, he's justifying it by he's sending money at first back home. Also, when he left, he wasn't really viewed very like good, right? Like there was a scandal. So he left to avoid that. And he wanted to come back with an improved image. Right? So eventually, yeah, I'm going to become a nice lawman. I'm going to become a Mountie. Your wee Jack, a Mountie, it's a respectable career, right? He wants to come back as an officer. And did he try and go back? Well, he kind of did. Yeah. Yeah, he tried to enlist in the army, right? And then we have our Doukhobors. We see this word, we think Russians. So these are Russian settlers who came to Canada. Now, a little bit about their livelihood here. So these are people who rejected materialism. Not this giant, like you need to own everything. They cared a lot more about like living as a community. So they rejected materialism. That's why they didn't they try not to wear clothes. That's why they're like burning stuff down. So they rejected materialism and lived in their own communities. And so how come they're coming to Canada? They're Russian. What do they want? Land. They came to Canada for land, right? Because they want to grow this community, this ideology. They want to have a place where they can practice their beliefs. So they come to Canada to get for free land.
Their community still exists.
Actually, yes. Yes. Not a lot, but there are some. I actually don't know where one is, though. I think there's 3 still that are active. Okay. And so finally, what we're going to have now is we are going to have our plot summary, because there's been a lot of stuff that's happened. And we accidentally read ahead to chapter 8, so we'll ignore that for now. But so our plot summary. And so remember, where we left off was he got laid off in Saskatoon and he moved to Prince Albert. This is where this chapter 5 started. So he got laid off in Saskatoon, moved to PA. What did he do in PA? He tried to start a business. Remember what business?
Okay.
Yeah, he's going to be a tomato farmer. in 1914, the fall of 1914, and it fails catastrophically. Now, he might have known what he was doing. He got a hailstorm, right? Like what are you gonna do? Like that, bad luck.
Must be shit.
And he's trying to grow in a drought too. Like, so, just bad luck. So he fails. Ah, crap. I now have no work. I'm going to try and help a neighboring farmer. And as he's walking down the street, he sees a poster. Sorry, as he's walking down the street, news breaks out. World War I starts. He's going to enlist. And he is denied for his lungs. So poor Jack can't grow a farm, can't enlist in the army. He sees a poster for what in the window? Yes. So he enlists in the Royal Northwest Mounted Police, RNWMP. So he enlists, he gets trained. It's a lot of training. He eventually succeeds in it though. And where is he placed? His first placement as an officer. Blaine Lake. So he is moved to Blaine Lake, which is just a little bit north of Saskatoon. And who does he meet there? Yes. So he meets the Pattersons. Now, the person in the story who you guys have kind of keyed in on is Jesse. So he meets the Pattersons in 1915. I'll add some dates here. That'll be important. And he tries to enlist. He fails to enlist in 1916. Okay, we're going to go up to chapter 10 today, and then that will be it. Maybe a second there. So we've done chapter 8. We'll read chapter 9 and 10, and then that will be it for today. Okay. And so, like I said, we did stop at chapter 8 just before the break, but basically, in chapter 8, which started on page 26, this is when we get that military deadlock, and they're starting to realize that, oh, we just sent all our guys over to war. They're all dying. And we got no one to fill all these jobs now. So chapter 8 talked a lot about the war, the dangers there, talked a lot about some of the consequences back home. And we saw a little bit more of Polly's life as well, about what she's currently struggling with. So let's go into chapter 9. And that's on page, what page? 29. So chapter 20 or page 29, chapter 9. I'll come back to that in a bit. We're still going. But bad news. So again, based off the title, the man just can't win. As the war raged on, Jack Wilson was fighting a battle of his own. For months, he had felt unwell. The demands of his job, keep in mind, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The demands of his job, easily handled for the first year and a half, now sapped his energy terribly. He was grateful that the force was now using automobiles. They saved him time and energy. He could always pull off the road and rest a bit. And the heat was debilitating. Remember, summer in Saskatchewan kind of sucks sometimes. We can get up to 40 degrees Celsius. 30 degrees are quite common. He hadn't gotten used to it yet. Maybe he never would. He often sat in the lobby of the Blaine Lake Hotel where it was cool just sat there, taking one careful breath after another. Could have lain down right there on the lobby floor and let people walk all over them. What do you think's wrong with him? He's obviously sick with something. Not quite. The Spanish flu came back at the end of the war in 1918. It's a good guess, though. Could be maybe like something like smallpox, maybe bronchitis, maybe tuberculosis, maybe pneumonia. All good guesses. Something he's not breathing right? We know he has bad lungs. He's not breathing right. He doesn't have energy. All are good guesses. On one day in the summer of 1917, year 5. As he was forcing himself to go out into the burning street, he saw John Patterson striding purposely into the lobby. They met near the registration desk where the proprietor, Alex Armstrong, was leaning on the counter reading a newspaper. "Hello, John. Hot enough for you?" Sometimes Wilson was surprised to hear himself talking like a person from the prairies. "Jack, I need to talk to you if you have a minute," Patterson said. He looked serious. "Oh, what about?" John Patterson took Wilson's arms and moved a few steps away from the front. He lowered his voice. "It's about Jesse. You seeing Jesse, I mean. I want you to tell me. Well, you know, there are rumors going around that you're a married man, and I have to ask you if they're true." So, there's rumors going on. Are you married? So keep in mind, at this time, he met Jessie when she was 16 in 1915. This is summer of 1917. How old is she probably? 18, and he is 34. I think 34. So, John, are you married? I've been hearing some rumors. "No, they're not true. I was married, but my dad left after I left the old country." So this is a lie, a bold-faced lie. Oh, well, I'm sorry to hear that. It's all right. It's almost 3 years ago, but you know how stories get twisted. So 3 years ago, when did he stop writing? About 3 years ago. When we last looked at Polly, it was 1916. This is the end of the last chapter. It's 1916. She hasn't heard from her husband in 2 years. We fast forwarded one more year now to 1917. Well, my wife died 3 years ago. He stopped writing 3 years ago. "Oh, sure. I know what it's like in a small place. Did you have any children?" "No, we didn't. And I'm glad about that now under the circumstances." Lie. He has 2 children. John Patterson clapped Wilson on his thin shoulder. "Sorry to bring it up, Jack, but I had to ask because of Jessie, you understand. She's got so fond of you." Right? She's crushing on him, right? "That's all right. I'd better move along. I've got to check out a lead up north. Come for supper if you're back in time. You need to put on a few pounds." So we see he's really thin. He's not breathing right. He's weak. "Thanks, I will." After the door closed behind John Patterson, Wilson walked to the desk. Alex Armstrong put down the paper he'd been pretending to read. "I was just telling John there that my wife passed away after I left the old country." "Yeah, I couldn't help hearing. That's too bad. What happened, if you don't mind me asking?" "Well, it's quite a story." Jack's expression implied that there was something scandalous about his wife's deaths. "Yes, sir, it's quite a story. I'll have to tell you sometime." He waves as he took out onto the street. The heat took his breath away, heat like a powerful presence, rippling over his skin. He hoped it would bring on a storm. Rain would feel so good. So this conversation here is happening between the hotel person at the desk and Jesse's father. And the hotel guy was just saying, "Yeah, I was just talking to John, talking about my wife. She died before I left." In spite, Jack's expression implied there was something scandalous about his wife's death. So Jack was, they noticed that, oh, Jack was looking a little weird when he said his wife died. So, in spite of how ill he'd felt for so long, Jack Wilson wasn't prepared for the shocking story when he saw the doctor at the end of summer. He sat at the examining table, bare to the waist, as the doctor's cold stethoscope explored his thin back and chest, raising goosebumps on his goose pimples on his white skin. And another deep breath in. He inhaled shallowly, unsteadily, his breath making a strange clicking and gurgling sound in the quiet office. Now out. It took a long time to breathe out, as if there was something in the way. The doctor's expression changed, deeper now. I can't. I haven't been able to for ages. He exhaled another shallow, prolonged breath. The doctor listened, frowned, took his temperature, probed some more, tapped Wilson's chest above the clavicle. A dull thudding sound appeared in his throat, then folded the stethoscope and handed Wilson his shirt. Jack's hand trembled as he fumbled buttons in the buttonholes. He didn't give a damn anymore what happened to him. He just wanted to lie down on this table and never give up. I'm sorry to tell you, Jack, but you have TB, tuberculosis. Now, some context here about tuberculosis. We've learned this in the last class, but immensely deadly, especially if you have no immunity to it. Now, he is from Europe. It has been around there, so he does have some natural built immunity to it. But what does tuberculosis affect? Your respiratory system, of which he has a really crappy one. So, oh no, his head and shoulders slumped. His worst fears confirmed. You're sure? Yes, 99% sure it's tuberculosis. Tuberculosis, a dreaded word, tantamount to a death sentence in 1917, 30 years before the discovery of antibiotics. So it is a death sentence for most people, never mind for a guy with really bad lungs. He knew how deadly it was. Only 10% survived. 10% of healthy, strong people. He is not healthy and strong. And it sounds pretty advanced. It's not like smallpox or typhoid, you know. You could have it a long time before you're ill. Do you have anyone to look after you? No, I don't. Are you saying I won't be able to work? The doctor shook his head. You'll soon be so ill you'll have to be in bed. You should be there now. Can you give me anything? Jack said without much hope. No, nothing. With care. Good food, complete bed rest, you might get better. Without it, he shrugged and gestured, palms up. Outside on the street, Wilson shivered, though the day was warm. What was he going to do? He wished, not for the first time, that he'd never left the old country. Well, the first thing he had to do was report to headquarters. When he informed his superiors of his illness, he was discharged from the Royal Northwest Mounted Police and asked to turn in his uniform. He was supplied with a tent and instructed to quarantine himself. You're sick with something that's likely to kill you? Here's a tent. Go camping. Right? Take this tent, go away, go die. Jack Wilson was a very sick man, far from family, home and family, with little money, no clothes but hand-me-downs, and no place to go, since the first sanatorium in the province would not open till October. The sight of that lonely tent on the edge of town as cool fall evenings drew would have stirred pity in the hardest of hearts. Jessie Patterson did not have a hard heart, nor did it seem her parents. They did everything they could to help Wilson. He came to their house every day and sat shivering in a chair, while Jessie and her mother applied poultices on his thin chest and back. Later, when it became obvious he was too sick to be in a tent with winter coming, like obviously, right? Like go camping in -40, you're gonna die. They nursed him home. Through the worst of it, a brave or foolhardy thing to do in more ways than one. Remember, tuberculosis, very contagious, very deadly, and they're nursing him back to health all winter. He was told to go quarantine himself. Morally courageous, since the wagon tons were sure to wag faster, and physically and emotionally contagious, given the wildly contagious nature of the disease. And so this is when, oh yeah. I'm not as well. It is, but like most people do have immunity like to it. So like in most cases, like you shouldn't probably get it. I'm not like an expert at it, but yeah, most people get like bronchitis. Like by the time we're our ages, yeah, you probably have that at least once. So Wilson lived in the long winter of 1917 to 1918. We are now 6 years after the fact. Looked after primarily by Jessie and her family, who he said was the soul of goodness. She was good to me above everyone else, he would often say later. He was determined, if he recovered, to spend a lifetime repaying Jessie for her kindness.
Was this a kindness? Absolutely. Like, he was given a death sentence, and they risked a lot to all winter. They fed him, housed him, took care of him, nursed him back to health against all odds, basically.
From their side, too, they would have thought it was gonna be that kind of-
Yes, yeah. There was not a good understanding of germs and stuff at the time, and bacteria. Like, you know, there was a doctor who recommended that, maybe we should wash our hands before we do surgeries. And he got so shunned, he killed himself. So like, there is not a good understanding of how diseases work in this current day and age. So he is determined to spend a lifetime repaying Jessie for her kindness, and a kindness it was. At some point in that winter, he asked Jessie to marry him. He explained, however, that his wife was not dead, but that he was divorcing her because she was a woman with no morals whatsoever who had tricked him into marrying her.
What?
The divorce would soon be final. Now Jessie understood why Jack looked so sad, and yes, she would marry him. So we're seeing a lie. Now remember, Jack really cares about how people look at him, right? He wants to be viewed as a man with integrity. So yeah, I'm here now. Yes, yes, I like your daughter likes me, but it's okay. My wife's dead. And, she took care of me. She saved his life. Realistically, she saved his life. I want to repay her kindness, but I have to be honest with you, my wife's not actually dead. But here's this really convenient reason why I'm the victim in all of this. That's what's happening here, right?
Well, he's with someone else now, okay, whatever, and so we still end up like, I don't know, assuming that's.
Well, we're going to find out. It's a good guess. It has been 5 years since it has been 6 years since he has seen his wife. It has been 4 years since he has written his wife. Many young women Jesse's age would have had second thoughts about commitment to the romantic mounted policeman when he was no longer romantic or a policeman and lay coughing up bits of his lungs in a bed she'd probably given up for him. But tuberculosis still had an aura of refinement. It was seen as an artist's disease, singling out those with a delicate aesthetic natures. The Latin root of consumption, the 19th word for the disease, reinforced the idea. Con meaning completely, plus samir, to take it from under. An etymology that suggests the body is being taken up to some loftier plane. 19th and early 20th century literature supported the mythology, and even doctors subscribed to its theory. Again, we know nothing about medicine at this point in time. When Robert Koch discovered the tubercle bacillus, the bacteria, in 1882, the public and many in the medical profession were skeptical. They were reluctant to give up the belief that this disease was caused chiefly by the victim's own delicate constitution. The disease, strikes those who are weak in body. Tuberculosis was thus regarded as a genteel disease leading to an easy death. The transcendental beauty of fictional heroes and heroines was no doubt based on the sparkling eyes and flush of low-grade fever. They're like, it's a beautiful way to die. No, it's an awful way to die. The more disgusting manifestations of this disease of fluids, sweat, sputum, blood, were conveniently omitted from novels, plays, and operas. Remember, doctors believed this at this point in time. And of course, the gentle death of the 19th century fiction was just that, fiction. Hemorrhaging to death, as many did, was terrifying. There were only 2 known treatments of tuberculosis at the time. One was complete bed rest with plenty of fresh air. The other being tried in the East was an artificial pneumothorax, in which the affected lung was collapsed by air injected between it and the chest wall. Since the bacilli needed air to thrive, the theory was that the healing would take place as the lung rested. The air dissipated into the body in 2 or 3 weeks with much attendant discomfort, and the whole procedure was repeated. So it's basically, you can try this experimental treatment that's really painful, where we inject a bunch of air into your body, or you can get plenty of bed rest in and pray. So slowly, over that long, quiet winter, John Wilson began to recover. As spring approached, spring of 1918, strength seeped back into his wasted body. The fever subsided, and he began to gain weight. By early spring, he was up and around, gaining strength every day. He must have had a little money put aside or borrowed some as he moved to the Blaine Lake Hotel in the spring. So this is a guy who has not worked for 6 months, who was working a job with an extremely dismal salary. He had money saved up. He spent a lot of time just sitting in the lobby and going for walks a little farther every time and visiting Jesse. His tangled domestic affairs seemed secondary for the moment. Jack Wilson was surprised and grateful to be alive. In April, the snow melted, the ditches ran, and the sun brought comfort to body and soul. Rude, noisy, dirty. A typical prairie spring. A gentler spring had arrived long across the sea. It was the 6th spring Jack had missed, but he was not homesick. Home was wherever Jesse was. So chapter 10, we'll be finished after this one. First foot in, December 31st, 1917. So just before the New Year's. This is New Year's Day, right? December 31st. So we're going back in time, by the way. So right now, for Jack, John, it is 1918. Now we're going to go into Holly, 1917. December 31st, 1917. Another Hogmanay. And tomorrow, their 10th wedding anniversary. They were married the new year. It's their 10th anniversary, night before. The 6th Hogmanay Jack has missed, the 5th anniversary. Her parents' house gleamed, every speck of dust banished, every smooth surface polished to death. Polly had done the same in her own house back in, Kadzau before she came. Every cupboard scrubbed out, every curtain washed, every floor and window shining, not a thing left unwashed, unironed or unpolished. Not a thing out of place. How you left your house when the clock struck 12 on the first foot in night is how it would be all year. First foot in night, New Year's, right? How you left your house on New Year's would be how it was going to be all year. It was bad luck to forget anything, but she needed to be here with her family this night, needed to tell them of her decision and to ask their assistance and their blessing. Her father wandered into the parlor. Hey, Polly, have you seen my slippers anywhere? He was all dressed up, shine on his black shoes, the shine on his black shoes deafening. No, father, I haven't. Mother's probably put them in your cupboard. Wash them, starch them, and iron them more like, he grinned at her. Polly laughed, and William Hutchinson patted her shoulder. He loved all his children, but Polly had a special place in his heart. She always seemed such a cheery little person, and she'd been such a brave lass these past years. And where are the bairns? Those are the kids. George finally agreed to take a nap. He made me promise to get him up for the first footing. And Ella keeled over an hour ago. Worn out with all the blether and poor bairns, I don't wonder. But her father looked with satisfaction around the room. The small fire had been laid in the crate. It would be lit and die down, and then a new one would be laid before midnight. The unopened bottle of whiskey, they're Scottish, sat on the sideboard, ready for the New Year's dram. Consciences had all been examined, none more diligently than William Hutchinson's. For the good suffer more from conscience than any. Old slights all forgiven. He rubbed his hands in anticipation. So New Year's Day is like it holds a tradition in this culture right here in this point in time. Helen Hutchinson bustled in. She had changed into her good blue dress the first time he'd seen her without an apron for days. Do you think you could all light the fire, Father? Lizzie and Archie will be here any minute. Jim and Nellie and the others too. If you tell me what you've done with my slippers, I'll light the fire. Helen laughed and patted his smooth cheeks. Happy Hogmanay, Father. You're looking that handsome, I hardly know ye. Now, is that a compliment or is it not? It's hard to tell, isn't it? He winked at Polly as calls of happy Hogmanay heralded the arrival of Jim and family with Lizzie and Archie close behind. When they were all assembled and exchanged news, Polly knew the moment had come. I must talk to you all while the bairns are sleeping. You know, I've had no word from Jack since last June. So since June 2016, so he has been writing her a little bit. June 2016. Still nothing, Jim asked. I was hoping he'd have remembered your anniversary. It was only for her present happiness he wished it. He had concluded that she'd be better off in the long run if she never heard from the scoundrel again. So he cares a lot about his reputation. He left here to, try and rebuild that reputation, come back a little bit more honorable, wait for this all to blow over. It has not. People back home despise the man.
Oh, good.
No, nothing, but I've made a decision and I'm hoping you'll all stand behind me, for I need your help. She had their undivided attention. Lizzie moved across the room to sit beside Polly and take her hand. Nellie glanced at her parents. I must go to Canada and look for Jack. So her plan is she's going to go to Canada. She's going to look for Jack. I haven't heard from him for a while.
It's so. Most of the time.
Well, that's what she wants to do. Oh. Well, hi.
It's very, very healthy. I need to do some particular very sentence, but I can always tell. them.
Oh, we are almost done.
Okay.
So I must go to Canada and look for Jack. There was a moment's shocked silence, but Polly, you don't even know where he is or if he's what? He's dead, right? William began. A look from his wife silenced him. It's all right, mother. Father's right. I don't know if Jack's alive, but I feel so afraid for him. He sounded so ill last time he wrote. And who does he have to take care of him in that big, lonely country? When are you thinking of going, Polly? This from Lizzie. In April. It will be spring by then. So she's planning on leaving in April 1918. April 1918, she will leave. I've been putting some money in and almost have enough for the fare. I think you should wait until the war is over. Keep in mind, the war ends in 1919. Or 1918. Yeah. Jim agreed. Who knows what could happen with the German submarine still out there? Think of the Lustinia. The fire crackled in the sudden silence. And that terrible explosion in Halifax last month, right where you'd be landing, Nellie added. 6.5 years is a long time to wait. Polly's voice wavered for a moment, then she straightened up and her voice recovered. Even if Jack is dead, I must know, don't you see? I have to find out for the children's sake as well as my own. Yes, said her mother. Polly has to go on with her life, and without Jack, we must understand that. We'll take the children, won't we, Father, till you get back. It probably won't be too long. But what if it's TB John's got? Well, that's what he got, Elizabeth said. With his lungs, it probably is, and you know how contagious that is. At least the children have a mother now. So like her worry is, what if she is alive? What if you find him, he has tuberculosis, and then you get it? Now you have orphans. Now, Lizzie, William said, if Polly's made up her mind, there's no use making it worse. It's hard enough for her. And for me, he wanted to say, to see my sweet daughter go off God knows where, to God knows what. But you mustn't impose your will on your children when they are no longer children. Yes, of course we'll take the bairns. We'll take the kids. It will be good for us, eh? Mother, make us young again? Just try to think what you would do if it was Archie, Polly said, and Elizabeth gave her a sudden fierce hug. You never know, said her mother. Jack could be home by then, or at least you might know when he's coming. Jim got up and went outside to have a smoke. In his mother's house, even that was not allowed, not until first footing. Who will it be, he wondered, the first man across the threshold? Probably David Thompson. He lit up, blown the smoke out into the damp, foggy night. Polly shouldn't go. He felt it in his bones. There was just more heartbreak in store for her over there, but maybe that's what it would take for her to face the truth. Jack Wilson did not want to come home. That should be obvious to anybody. Inside, William Hutchinson's raked the ash from the fire and scooped them into the copper scuttle. Helen swept the hearth clean as he carried out the ash in preparation for the new year, the ritual they had performed together each year for 45 years. The clock on the mantel pointed a quarter to the hour, 11:45. Upstairs, Polly roused Sleepy George to take part in the festivities. She felt such enormous relief. This coming year would settle things one way or another. By the time the clock began to strike midnight and the town church bells pealed out, they were all back in the warm room. Let's open the window, Mother, William said. Let the old year out. They pushed the casement window wide. There it goes. Remember, it's really tradition here. This New Year's really a celebration. Let all the crap that happened last year out, and let's have a nice, helpful New Year. Yes, and now we wait for the first foot, the new year, said William. I wonder who it will be. His children smiled at each other. They knew how he loved the ceremony, and they knew very well who the first foot would be, since he would have arranged it, as always, with a dark-haired man. A blonde man was unlucky because he might have once been a Norse invader. This very depended on where you lived in Scotland, but here the first foot had to be dark or bad luck would befall the house. So the first person in the house had to be dark-haired. In a small village like this Slam, this kept the dark-haired men busy. At the sound of the last chime, the whiskey bottle was opened with great ceremony and small crystal glasses passed around. Just a wee bit of insurance, said William. George stared wide-eyed at the door, for the first foot is rather like Santa Claus. To 1918, his grandfather said, to a healthy and prosperous year for everyone and a happy new year to us all. The grown-ups clinked glasses, and to a safe and successful journey for our Polly, William said. Grateful eyes filled Polly's eyes as the family drank to that. Then Helen, Polly, Lizzie went to the kitchen for trays of sandwiches and shortbread. The traditional and delicious black bun would be brought in by the first foot. At the hammering of the door, George shrieked. With a great flourish, William swung the door open. Happy hogmanning to the Hutchinsons, cried the red-haired man lurching across the threshold. He had obviously started his on his not so wee dram long before midnight. So, what hair color is supposed to enter the house? Dark-haired. How come? For good luck, yeah. And if you get someone who isn't like dark-haired, you get bad luck. What color is the hair of the guy who opened and came in? Red. So it's kind of like an omen, right? Huh. Well, good luck to Polly as she goes across overseas. Oh, we get this guy who's going to bring bad luck into the house came by. Foreshadowing. Oh dear, it's Clyde Barrow. Mary tried not to sound upset. Where's David? Here, called the voice, and the dark-haired David Thompson stepped in with a bottle in one hand and a beautiful wrapped parcel in the other. The black bun full of walnuts and cinnamon to be shared with the wee dram and some shortbread. He handed the bottle to William and the black bun to Helen. Happy New Year to the Hutchinsons. Oops, sorry, friends. Clyde Barrow's good nature face fell. I'll go out and come in again. And he did. He said, and he did. But it wasn't the same. It wasn't the same at all. End story. So a bit of an omen there. We can probably start guessing a little bit what's happened towards the story. So we got 10 minutes here. We won't do a plot summary. We'll open up with that tomorrow, but you get some time here to just try out these next, I guess, 5 questions here as best you can. Oh, a little bit more actually. So just try these out as best you can. We will go over it, but you'll get a couple minutes for that.